They left me in a nursing home like I was yesterday's trash. What they didn't realize was this: I wasn't finished yet. Before I tell you how everything unfolded, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know where my sisters are listening from. Now let me take you back to the day my life cracked open. That morning the sky was dull and lifeless, one of those heavy gray days that sits on your chest like unspoken bad news. I should have known something was wrong. Karen called early, all sweet and cheerful, saying she was coming over with David and Luke to help me organize a few things. Help. I should have known better. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I once braided their hair, checked homework, cut birthday cakes. I even poured 4 cups of coffee, like we were about to have a loving family discussion. Foolish, right? I wore my pink sweater, the one George always said made me glow. I adjusted my lipstick using the toaster's reflection. Funny how even then I wanted to look good for my children. I still wanted their love. The door slammed harder than necessary. Karen entered first, sharp, efficient, wearing that tight smile she always had when she wasn't telling the truth. David followed, glued to his phone. Luke came in last, holding a folder. The sight of it made my stomach turn. "Mom," Karen began. "That's always how it starts, isn't it? Right before your world falls apart." She spoke slowly, gently, like I was a child. Told me they'd found a wonderful place for me. A resort-style senior living facility in the hill country. She made it sound like a vacation brochure. I shook my head. "I'm not leaving," I said. "This is my home." Luke slid the papers across the table. "Mom, you've been forgetting things. We're just trying to keep you safe." Safe from what? My own life? I wanted to scream. Instead, I stared at my hands, the same hands that packed their lunches, stitched costumes, held them through fevers and nightmares. The hands that worked double shifts after George died just to keep this house standing. "You already signed the power of attorney," Karen said softly. My legs nearly gave out. I didn't remember signing anything. I had been tired, yes. Sometimes days blurred together. But I trusted them. They were my children. I never imagined they'd use that trust as a weapon. Within an hour, my life was packed into one suitcase. I wasn't even allowed to choose which photo frames to take. My house, my memories, my sacrifices, gone in an afternoon. The car ride was silent. David drove. Karen sat beside him texting. Luke sat in the back with me but never once met my eyes. "You'll like it there," he said quietly. "They have bingo and movie nights." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. The building was beige, between a gas station and a dry cleaner. No trees. No garden. Just concrete and walls the color of surrender. A nurse greeted us with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That first night, I cried into my pillow like a child. Not because of the room or the food, but because my children no longer saw me as a human being. I was a problem to be removed. But here's the thing about me. I don't stay broken forever. After a few weeks I stopped raging. I watched. I listened. I learned. I saw overworked staff and residents who looked like they were waiting for the end. And then I saw Ruth. She was in the common room, playing cards with a nurse, laughing like a movie villain. "You bet your lunch money on that hand," she shouted. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "You're new," she said. "Got that betrayed by your own family look." I laughed. Really laughed. Soon there was Diane, gentle but sharp, retired librarian, noticed everything. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stared at my hands, the same hands that packed their lunches, stitched costumes, held them through fevers and nightmares. The hands that worked double shifts after George died just to keep this house standing. "You already signed the power of attorney," Karen said softly. My legs nearly gave out. I didn't remember signing anything. I had been tired, yes. Sometimes days blurred together. But I trusted them. They were my children. I never imagined they'd use that trust as a weapon. Within an hour, my life was packed into one suitcase. I wasn't even allowed to choose which photo frames to take. My house, my memories, my sacrifices, gone in an afternoon. The car ride was silent. David drove. Karen sat beside him texting. Luke sat in the back with me but never once met my eyes. "You'll like it there," he said quietly. "They have bingo and movie nights." I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. The building was beige, between a gas station and a dry cleaner. No trees. No garden. Just concrete and walls the color of surrender. A nurse greeted us with a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That first night, I cried into my pillow like a child, not because of the room or the food, but because my children no longer saw me as a human being. I was a problem to be removed. But here's the thing about me. I don't stay broken forever. After a few weeks I stopped raging. I watched. I listened. I learned. I saw overworked staff and residents who looked like they were waiting for the end. And then I saw Ruth. She was in the common room, playing cards with a nurse, laughing like a movie villain. "You bet your lunch money on that hand," she shouted. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "You're new," she said. "Got that betrayed by your own family look." I laughed. Really laughed. Soon there was Diane, gentle but sharp, retired librarian, noticed everything. No notary stamp. No official seal. Just my signature. I dropped onto the edge of the bed, the papers trembling in my hands. Everything I had shoved deep down, shame, grief, fury, came crashing back all at once. My children hadn't moved me out of love. They hadn't done it to protect me. They wanted my house. Plain and simple. Probably planned to renovate it, flip it, and sell it to some young couple for a clean profit. I held that deed to my chest like it was the last piece of myself they hadn't taken. For the first time since George was laid to rest, I prayed. Not for strength. Not for comfort. I prayed for clarity. For direction. For a sign. And the sign arrived the very next morning. Ruth burst into the dining hall in her lavender sweater, rhinestone buttons flashing like a warning signal. "Guess who's back from her son's wedding?" she announced. "Maxine, and she's got opinions." That's how Maxine returned to our table. She'd been gone a week for her youngest son's wedding in Austin, and judging by the way she poured her black coffee and rolled her eyes, it hadn't been a celebration. "New wife's a walking Botox advertisement," she muttered. "Wouldn't recognize a book if it smacked her in the mouth." We laughed, but my mind was elsewhere. After breakfast, when the nurses were busy chasing down the man who kept flushing magazines down the toilet, I pulled Maxine aside. "I need your help," I whispered. That afternoon, inside Maxine's room, privacy she always managed to secure, we spread the papers across her desk. The deed. My will. The medical power of attorney I now remembered signing after a nasty fall last year. Karen had brought Chinese food that night. And paperwork. Urgent paperwork. "You never signed over ownership," Maxine said firmly, tapping the page with her red nails. "They control medical decisions, yes. But the house is still yours." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Can they sell it anyway?" "Not legally. Unless they forge your signature." I clenched my jaw. "Then I sell it first." She stared at me, surprised. Then she smiled. "Damn right you do." The plan came together quickly. Ruth swore she still had the number of a real estate agent she once dated. Probably bald and divorced by now, but useful. Diane helped us work around the facility's phone rules and set up a Gmail account on the community center computer. Maxine handled the real calls, the legal ones, the financial ones. With every step, I felt myself waking up after years of sleepwalking. I smiled at the nurse's station. I answered Karen's calls with a soft voice, played the grateful, obedient mother. I even declined visits. Meanwhile, I was preparing my escape. The house sold almost instantly. Apparently my neighborhood was gold for tech workers and young families. The buyer offered full price within hours. I never even met them. Maxine's old law contact, Jack Winston, brilliant, cranky, and still owing her a favor, handled everything. The money was wired into a brand new account under my name. Diane helped me set it up using the facility's public Wi-Fi. No one suspects little old women of planning revolutions. But disappearing was the hardest part. We chose a Friday night. Bingo night. Most of the staff would be distracted. Ruth bribed a young aide with perfume and pizza to forget our hallway checks. I packed one small suitcase. My passport. A printed itinerary. 3 one-way plane tickets. On my pillow I left a note. "Don't look for me. I've gone to reclaim the life you stole." Eleanor, the ride to the airport was silent. For women crammed into an Uber with broken air conditioning and a driver who asked no questions. The airport lights felt holy. I nearly cried. Roamed out a city I'd only ever seen in films, dreamed about in quiet moments. As the plane lifted off, Texas glittered beneath us like tears I refused to shed. I didn't know what came next. How long we'd last. How far we'd go. But I knew this. They had taken everything from me. And when you have nothing left to lose, you become dangerous. Rome greeted us with the smell of fresh bread, ancient stone, and something sweet I couldn't name. Freedom, maybe. Joy. Or revenge. It was my first flight in over 20 years. My body ached. I hadn't slept at all. But I couldn't stop smiling. Ruth snored the entire flight, her head bobbing like a pigeon. Diane squeezed my hand during takeoff, whispering prayers in English and half-forgotten Latin. Maxine read a thriller and sipped tomato juice like we were tourists, not fugitives chasing redemption. We landed at sunrise, the eternal city glowing beneath us like a promise. Cobblestone streets. Flower boxes. A violinist playing by a fountain. I almost cried. Our pensione in Trastevere was simple. Clean sheets, warm bread each morning. Ivy climbing the walls like poetry. The clerk didn't blink when 4 gray-haired American women with too few suitcases checked in. Then again, Rome had seen stranger revolutions that first day. We walked until our legs refused to carry us any farther. Ruth haggled loudly with a street vendor over scarves none of us needed. Diane bought postcards and wrote one to her high school sweetheart. Gone for 15 years now. Maxine charmed a cafe owner named Luca, who rewarded us with complimentary tiramisu. And me. I stood in front of the Colosseum and let the wind sweep across my face. I wasn't anyone's responsibility. I wasn't a burden or a forgotten mother. I was Eleanora Grace Miller, standing, breathing, alive. But freedom has a way of waking old ghosts. On our third night, I opened my email. I shouldn't have. Curiosity can be cruel. There were 10 messages from Karen. The latest subject line read, "What have you done?" I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I could already hear her voice. Shocked, furious, unraveling. The house was gone. The money was gone. And so was I. Maxine found me on the terrace, my laptop open. A full glass of wine untouched in my hand. She sat beside me, nudged my knee with hers. "You okay?" she asked. "I don't feel guilty," I said quietly, surprised by my own honesty. "I thought I would." She lit a cigarette. "Rules be damned. They had a choice, Ellie. They chose themselves. You just chose you." The next morning we took a train to Florence. I had dreamed of seeing the Duomo my whole life. Standing beneath that vast painted dome. Heaven above, hell below, I thought of George. Of the promises we made. I had vowed to protect our children no matter what. I never imagined I'd need protection from them. That night I found the letters. We were staying in a tiny rental, peeling wallpaper. A bed that creaked with every movement. While unpacking, searching for a missing sock, I found a folder tucked into a side pocket I rarely used. George's handwriting. 6 letters. All addressed to me. Written over 5 years before he died. I read them silently, perched on the edge of the bed as the city murmured outside. In them, George wrote about the kids, how he'd noticed their entitlement, their manipulation. How he worried about how they treated me when he wasn't around. He mentioned conversations with Luke that chilled him. Suggestions that maybe it was time for Mom to move on. Even when I was perfectly healthy. He had seen it coming. He just didn't know how to stop it. The last letter was dated only weeks before his heart gave out. "Ellie, if you're reading this, I hope to God I was wrong. But if they've turned on you, if you're alone, remember this. You are worth more than they've made you believe. Don't let them bury you before your time. Fight back however you can. You've always been stronger than me." I broke. I clutched that letter to my chest and rocked on the bed, sobbing like a child. Pain and love crashed over me together. Burning and beautiful. He knew. Even then he knew. The next morning I told the women everything. Ruth didn't hesitate. Then we raise hell. Maxine leaned forward. "I still know people in media. We tell your story. All of it." Diane nodded, eyes bright. "We go public. Elder abuse. Financial betrayal. Ellie, you're not alone. And your story could help others." And just like that, my escape became a mission. We contacted Jack Winston again. He helped us shape the story and sent it to a journalist friend in New York, Megan Luce, host of a syndicated podcast followed by thousands of older women hungry for truth. Within days, Megan called. She wanted to fly out and meet us. Said she'd been waiting for a story like this her entire career. While we waited, we traveled Venice, Nice, Lisbon. Everywhere we went, we danced, laughed, took photos that looked like they belonged in a calendar titled Fearless Grandmothers of the World. And slowly, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was healing. Then, standing barefoot on a beach in Portugal, wind in my hair, waves brushing my ankles, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered, expecting a hotel confirmation. Grandma. I nearly dropped the phone. It was Emily, my youngest granddaughter. She was crying. I found you, she said. Please don't hang up. My heart skipped. Grandma, I know what they did. Mom and Uncle Luke. I saw the letters. I heard the podcast. I need to talk to you. Please. The world tilted. The past wasn't finished with me, but neither was the future. I didn't answer her right away. I told her I needed time. That I wasn't ready. My hand shook so badly Ruth had to take the phone from me before it slipped into the Atlantic. She sounded genuine, Diane whispered later as we sat on a Lisbon rooftop, the sky glowing honeygold as the sun set. She's still one of them, Maxine said firmly. Don't let a soft voice fool you. But I couldn't stop thinking about Emily. She had always been different. Quiet. Thoughtful. She followed me in the garden when she was little, asked questions about birds, pulled weeds beside me. I'd kept her drawings, her crayon letters. She was the only grandchild who hadn't stopped calling, until Karen cut me off completely. Emily was 16 now, old enough to see truth. Or maybe this was another trap. 2 days later I received a text. Just a photo. My house. Or what was left of it. The porch stripped bare. The rose bushes gone. The shutters George and I had painted sky blue one summer were now a lifeless beige. Stripped. Dull. Below the photo was a single line. They destroyed it. I'm sorry. I stared at the screen until my throat tightened, like an invisible hand squeezing the air out of me. They hadn't just sold my home, they had hollowed it out. Erased every trace of the life I built brick by brick. I showed the photo to the women. Ruth turned away. Diane's eyes filled with tears. Maxine studied it silently, then flicked her cigarette into the wind. Time to go public, she said. The interview with Megan Luce took place in a quiet cafe overlooking the Douro River. She arrived with nothing but a backpack of recording equipment and a face untouched by makeup. When she sat down, her warmth felt disarming, almost maternal. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. I told her about sacrifice, about double shifts and sleepless nights, about stretching pennies into birthdays and prayers into miracles. I told her about manipulation disguised as concern, about lies that slowly seeped into my bones. I told her how my own children removed me from my home like an outdated piece of furniture. When I finished, Megan took my hand. You are not alone, she said softly. And you have no idea how many women need to hear this. Your story is going to change things. The podcast aired a week later. It exploded. Hundreds of thousands of downloads. Messages poured in from women across the country. Mothers, grandmothers, widows, telling stories that mirrored mine. From daughters who carried regret. From sons who watched their mothers disappear quietly. I hadn't asked to be a symbol. I had simply survived. Karen messaged me the next day, furious, indignant. Luke called twice. David left a voicemail thick with slurred rage and veiled threats. I erased them all. Then came an email from Emily. She said she had left home. That she was staying with her aunt on her father's side. That after hearing my story, she couldn't look at her mother the same way anymore. She wanted to meet, not in Texas. Anywhere else. Please, she wrote. I just want to know you again. Maxine warned me. Ruth hesitated. Diane squeezed my hand. Sometimes healing means opening one last door. So I chose the place. Savannah, Georgia. A city that smelled of magnolias and memory. A place I'd always wanted to see. We flew the following week. Emily was waiting in Forsyth Park, seated beneath an oak draped in Spanish moss. When she saw me, she stood, eyes wide, tears already gathering. She looked like Karen once had, before bitterness hardened her edges, but there was something else too. Something raw. Searching. Hi, Grandma, she said. My voice nearly broke. Hi, sweetheart. We walked for hours. She asked about George. About my childhood. About the day they took me away. She told me she had found the letters by accident while searching for her birth certificate. She said she confronted them. "My mom slapped me," she whispered. "I couldn't stay after that." I looked at her, this young woman still half a child, and felt something inside me finally give way. I was tired of carrying anger, tired of revenge, that I wanted restoration. I held her tightly, as if I could press safety back into her bones. That night I told the women everything. Ruth wiped her eyes. Diane smiled gently. Maxine shook her head and said, "Well, damn. Guess there's hope for at least one of them." We stayed another week in Savannah. Emily joined us for dinners, river walks, stories beneath the stars. First it was awkward. Then it became something else, like learning to breathe again after being underwater too long. One night she turned to me and said, "What if we built something? A place for women like you. Like us." I didn't answer then. But the next morning over coffee and grits I said, "We're going to do it." I didn't know how yet, but I had the resources. I had the name, the Eleanora Grace Foundation. And I had a granddaughter willing to stand beside me, not against me. The past was a wound. But the future? The future was fire waiting for a match. The foundation began as an idea scribbled on a napkin in a diner off River Street. Emily drew little stars around the name. Her handwriting still soft, still young. Mine was firm and angular, shaped by years of endurance. We didn't have a blueprint, but we had purpose. To protect women like me. Mothers and widows. Grandmothers silenced and discarded by the very people they had given everything to. It wasn't just about money. It was about dignity. Emily took the lead. She registered the foundation, built the website, wrote the copy. She reached out to senior advocates and legal advisors. She launched a GoFundMe. It went viral. Hundreds of women shared their stories. Thousands donated with messages like, "This happened to my mother. Thank you for speaking up." I thought I was alone. We started small, a pilot program in Savannah. Weekly free legal clinics. Resource packets mailed to nursing homes. Online support groups. Seeing my name on the homepage felt unreal, like meeting a version of myself I'd never been allowed to become. And then the media started calling. Newsweek, CNN, NPR. The woman they tried to erase had found her voice. And this time the world was listening. They wanted my story, but I turned most of them away. I wasn't a spectacle. I wasn't a trend. I was a woman who had survived, and then built something meaningful from the ruins. I didn't want attention. I wanted impact. There was only one interview I agreed to, a local Savannah station. The reporter, Lorraine, a woman close to my age, asked gently at the end, "If you could say one thing to the people who put you in that nursing home, what would it be?" I looked straight into the camera. My voice didn't tremble. "I forgive you," I said. "But I will never forget who I became because of you." That clip spread everywhere. Karen saw it. After 6 months of silence, she left me a voicemail. I never listened. I didn't need to. Whatever she wanted to say, she'd had a lifetime to say it. That chapter was closed. Luke tried to sue me, claiming I stole the house out from under them. The judge dismissed the case in under 10 minutes. I didn't even attend. Maxine did. And from what I heard, she dismantled him sentence by sentence. David moved out of state. I haven't heard from him since. That suits me just fine. Emily became my shadow and my star. She traveled with me when we opened our first foundation home in upstate New York. A warm 5-bedroom house where women displaced by family neglect or abuse could live safely and rebuild their lives. We named it Grace House. When we cut the ribbon, I cried so hard my knees buckled. Ruth had to catch me before I fell. And Ruth, oh Ruth, she found love. Yes, that Ruth. It happened on a cruise to Alaska the following spring. His name was Dennis. Widower. Terrible dancer. Exceptional maker of chocolate martinis. She said he made her laugh like no one ever had. Now they spend half the year in Florida, arguing over shuffleboard and pretending they aren't wildly in love. Diane started a poetry blog. Somehow it gathered thousands of readers. She writes about grief and healing, and every post ends with a single line just for me. Still Eleanor rises. Maxine? Maxine became our legal director. She commands courtrooms like she was born behind a podium. Red lipstick on every day, she says it's her armor. And me? I kept traveling. kept speaking, kept fighting. Before the year ended, I visited my old house. Not to confront anyone, not to mourn, just to see. It had been repainted, the porch rebuilt. A young couple lived there now, a baby swing hanging out front. I stood across the street, unnoticed. Just an older woman in sunglasses and a scarf. I smiled. That house wasn't my home anymore. Home was wherever I stood in my truth. Wherever women gathered to lift one another up. Wherever Eleanor Grace Miller refused to disappear. As I walked away, a breeze drifted down the street carrying the scent of roses from somewhere nearby. I closed my eyes and for a moment, I could almost feel George's hand in mine. "We did it," I whispered. "We made it." And I knew. This wasn't the end of my story. It was only the beginning. The cruise ship looked like a floating palace, white and gleaming against sapphire water, gold letters spelling celestial dawn along its side. We boarded in Seattle beneath blooming cherry trees, petals drifting through the air like blessings. The scent of salt and fresh beginnings filled my lungs. It was our celebration. One promise kept before the next chapter began. I stood on the upper deck with Ruth, Diane, and Maxine as the ship eased away from shore. Emily was below in the cabin, finishing a virtual meeting, leading a grant proposal to open 3 more homes in the Midwest. She had grown into something fierce and radiant. I thanked God every day she had found her way back to me, and to herself. "Can you believe this?" Diane said, her floral scarf fluttering in the wind. "We should have done this 30 years ago," Ruth laughed, champagne glass raised. "But better late than never." Maxine pointed toward the horizon. "Look at that sky. I want to paint it, with a martini in my hand." We laughed, the kind of laughter that feels like oxygen after nearly drowning. That night, we dressed up and dined in the ship's ballroom. Velvet chairs, heavy silverware, warm lighting like candle glow. The band played softly, an old Ella Fitzgerald tune drifting through the air. Something stirred in me. I stood. "I want to dance," I said. "For the first time in years, I want to dance." Maxine raised an eyebrow. Ruth beamed. Diane already had her camera out. There was no partner waiting. Just me. Wearing a navy dress I'd bought on a whim in Florence, shoes that pinched and a heart overflowing. I stepped onto the floor anyway. I closed my eyes and moved slowly, gracefully, letting the music wrap around me like memory. I danced for every night I cried alone. For every forgotten holiday. For every woman who ever sat in a sterile room wondering if her life was already over. I danced for George. For Emily. For myself. Then I felt arms around me. Steady, respectful. I opened my eyes. Dennis. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Others joined. Couples. Solo dancers. A quiet sea of people moving together beneath the chandeliers. Not dancing like we were young again, but like we finally remembered who we were. When the music ended, the applause was gentle and deep. Honest. Back at the table, Emily stood and opened her arms as I approached. "You looked like you were flying," she whispered through tears. "I was," I said. For the first time in my life, I wasn't dancing for anyone else. Later, we stood on the balcony outside our shared suite. The sea stretched endlessly, moonlight scattered across the water. Then the northern lights appeared, green and violet waves rolling across the sky. We watched in silence. "Do you ever miss them?" Emily asked softly. "My parents." I looked out at the horizon, calm and endless. And for the first time, I knew exactly how to answer that. I took a slow breath. "I miss who I believed they were," I said quietly. "I miss the hope I once had, not the pain." Emily nodded and rested her head against my shoulder. "I'm sorry they hurt you." I kissed the crown of her head. "You didn't," I said softly. "And you're helping heal what they broke. That's more than I ever dreamed possible." Above us, the sky shimmered and moved. Below, the water whispered promises of new beginnings. And there I stood, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, but as Eleanor Grace Miller, mother, grandmother, founder, fighter. In that moment, I knew I had finally come home. Not to a place, but to myself. We reached Juneau just as the sun dipped behind jagged, icy peaks, washing the ship in gold. The harbor was calm, the waves gentle as we stepped onto the dock, wrapped in layers, our breath curling in the cold Alaskan air. The others headed off toward shops and seafood, laughing about crab legs and souvenirs. Emily and I chose something different. We booked a small helicopter tour. Something neither of us would have dared before. Heights terrified us. That was exactly why we did it. I want to see the world from above, I told her. Just once. Our pilot, Sam, a woman with a gravelly voice and the calm confidence of someone who had faced real storms, helped us into our seats. Emily squeezed my hand as the rotors began to spin. I couldn't stop grinning. As we lifted into the sky, the world below shrank. Juneau looked like a snow globe town. Mountains stretched endlessly, white, wild, and untouched. Glaciers cracked and shimmered like ancient glass rivers. When the sun broke through the clouds, the ice glowed, almost holy. I had never seen anything so vast. It made me feel small in the best way, humbled, awed, as though everything I'd endured had been leading me here. I'm glad you didn't give up, Emily said through the headset. I turned toward her, tears burning my eyes. I almost did, I admitted. But then you called. She squeezed my hand. I think you saved me too. We landed briefly on a stretch of ice, wrapped in thermal blankets, surrounded by a silence so deep it seemed to erase everything, pain, fear, memory. I pulled out George's final letter, the one I'd carried for so long, and let it go. The wind took it. It drifted, spun, and disappeared into the white. It was time to stop carrying the weight. That night, back on the ship, the others were waiting with champagne. To Eleanor, Ruth said, lifting her glass. The fiercest damn woman I've ever known. To Grace, Doy added. In every form she takes. To second chances, Maxine said with a wink. Emily leaned in and gently touched her glass to mine. To beginnings. We drank under the stars, wrapped in blankets and love. Our laughter carried across the sea. And when I slept, I didn't dream of the past, but of all the living still ahead. The final morning arrived wrapped in fog and stillness. I stood at the rail with a cup of coffee, watching Alaska fade into the distance. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt complete. Emily joined me, still in pajamas, her scarf crooked around her neck. Today feels different, she said. It is, I replied. It's the last day of running. Running from what? I turned to face her. From grief. From guilt. From everything I thought I failed to be. She met my eyes. You didn't fail, Grandma. They did. I smiled. Maybe. But I don't want my life defined by what was done to me. I want it defined by what I chose anyway. Later, the five of us gathered in a quiet lounge. No stage. No speeches. Just stories. We spoke the names of women lost to silence and abandonment. Ruth spoke of her sister. Doy read a poem she'd written the night before. Maxine lit candles, one for each of us, and one for every woman who never got the chance to live freely. And I told my story. Not the betrayal, not the pain, but the life I rediscovered. Gardening with George. Rocking babies on the porch. Dancing barefoot in the kitchen to old Motown records. My first kiss. Hitchhiking at 17. A Christmas puppy named Comet. I let others pour water on my fire for years, I said. But fire has a secret. If you protect the spark long enough, it burns again. We set our candles afloat in glass bowls and watched the flames dance. I'm going home, I said softly. To Texas. Maxine asked. No, I smiled. To where it all began. Savannah. They nodded. Felt right. It always had. 6 months later, Grace Haven opened its doors. A white 2-story house with green shutters and a porch wide enough to welcome the world. Emily became executive director. Ruth and Dennis hosted supper clubs. Doy led writing workshops. Maxine offered free legal help every Friday. And me? I sat on the porch each morning with my coffee, watching women arrive with shaking hands and broken stories, and leave with light in their eyes. Sometimes I told my story. Not because I needed to be heard, but because someone else needed to know survival wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Other times I simply listened, because I had learned something essential. True redemption isn't only about surviving what was done to you. It's about choosing to become someone they never imagined you could be. Someone stronger. Someone free. Someone unforgettable. My name is Eleanor Grace Miller. And this is my legacy. Not buildings. Not money. But the fire I passed on. And the women who now carry it forward. Our first Thanksgiving at Gracehaven arrived wrapped in warmth and wonder. Sunlight poured through the tall windows, turning the wooden floors a deep, glowing gold. The air was rich with cinnamon, roasted turkey, and fresh cornbread. Outside, Savannah's leaves had just begun to fall, reds and oranges carpeting the lawn, crunching softly beneath every step. Wind chimes on the porch whispered memories into the breeze. Inside there was laughter. Real laughter. The kind that rises from the belly, not courtesy. The long dining table, donated by a woman once told she was unfit to host, was now covered in mismatched plates, uneven silverware, and flickering candles tucked between serving dishes. Around it sat 22 women, some in pearls, some in jeans, every single one wearing hope. Gracehaven had been open only 3 months, and already lives had changed. There was Olivia, who escaped a marriage that silenced her for 35 years. Harriet, left homeless after her adult son drained her savings and vanished. Rosa, 71 years old, who learned to read for the first time and now filled the house with sticky notes, light, soft beginning. I sat at the head of the table not because I asked to, but because they insisted. They said I was the reason they were there. But I knew the truth. They were the reason I was whole again, that I stood to give a toast. Not a speech, just a few words, and lifted my glass of apple cider with a splash of bourbon, just the way George used to make it. This year, I said, I didn't lose everything. The room fell quiet. I found everything I was missing. I looked around, at Ruth and Dennis hands entwined, at Maxine carving the turkey like she was presiding over court, at Doy passing out homemade pie, slipping a napkin to a woman with tears on her cheeks, at Emily, my granddaughter, my lighthouse, standing behind me. I found myself, I continued, my voice trembling. I found family, not by blood but by choice. I found purpose in the ashes of pain. And this place, this isn't just a home for the broken. It's a home for the rising. Glasses clinked. Tears fell. Applause filled the room like music meant only for us. Later, as the sun dipped low and candlelight danced, I stepped onto the porch. Emily joined me. You never told me, she said softly, what you wished for. When? That night in Alaska, she said. When you let Grandpa's letter go. I smiled. I wished that one day, someone would know me for who I truly was. She leaned closer. And now, she asked. Now I wish, I said, that someone else will see their own worth before it's too late. You're changing the world, Grandma, she whispered. No, baby, I said gently. We are. We sat together, 2 generations of fire, watching the stars appear one by one like promises written across the sky. Winter came softly to Savannah. Not sharp like Texas cold, but gentle, crisp mornings, the scent of pine and clove, slower walks beneath gray skies. Gracehaven glowed with string lights and quiet miracles. Each room held a story. Clara arrived with a single suitcase and a photograph of her late husband. Her children had emptied her accounts and left her in a motel 2 towns away. She barely spoke at first, but weeks in the garden brought her hands back to the earth, and her voice back to herself. Naomi, a former nurse placed in assisted living against her will, now led morning yoga from a chair, teaching women how to breathe again, how to trust again. With every new arrival I saw myself. That woman in the beige nursing home. Suitcase at her feet. Faith slipping through her fingers. And every time I welcomed one in, I grew stronger. In January we held our first night of names. It was Doy's idea, and it was beautiful. We stood in a circle, each holding a candle, speaking the name of a woman we wished to honor. A mother, a friend, a past self. When it was my turn, I said quietly, Eleanor Grace Miller, the one who stayed silent for too long. I let the silence linger. Not in grief but in respect. That woman deserved remembrance. She loved even when it hurt. She endured without applause. And when it finally mattered, she stood. Later, Emily found me in the kitchen, her eyes still wet. I want to write a book, she said. About you. About all of this. I laughed. You think anyone wants to read about a grandma who sold her house out from under her kids and ran off to Italy with a group of retired rebels? Yes, she said firmly. Because they're out there. Women who feel trapped. Who think it's too late. Who think they're too old to begin again. She looked at me with fierce certainty. I want them to know it never is. That night I began writing again. scribbling thoughts into a spiral notebook. Memories, lessons, truths no one teaches you until life has nearly passed you by. I didn't know whether it would become a book, a blog, or simply a box of letters meant for whoever came next. But I knew this much. My voice would not go quiet again. February arrived carrying unexpected news. The foundation had been nominated for a national honor, the Women of Strength Legacy Grant, awarded to initiatives that uplift older women with dignity, autonomy, and voice. Maxine read the email aloud in the common room. Ruth shrieked. Doy cried openly. Emily grabbed my hands and danced me around the coffee table, like we were teenagers again. A week later, the local news team returned. This time they didn't just interview me. They interviewed us. The women of Grace Haven. One by one, each woman shared her story. And the cameras captured something words alone never could: power. Quiet, radiant, undeniable power. When the segment aired, our inbox flooded. Over 3,000 emails in 48 hours. Women asking for help. Daughters desperate to protect their mothers. Grandmothers searching for a place like ours. We were overwhelmed. Then we became resolute. We expanded. Another home opened in Asheville. One more in Michigan. A third planned for Oregon in the fall. Through it all, I kept my morning ritual. Coffee on the porch, a notebook in my lap, a whispered prayer on my lips. Not for justice anymore. For joy. For a life I never thought I'd be allowed to live. And every so often, I'd see a woman walking up our path for the first time, shoulders tight, eyes guarded. I would rise to meet her, take her hand and whisper softly, just loud enough for her heart to hear. You're not lost. You're just getting started. Spring came early that year, as if even the trees had grown impatient for more life. Wisteria wrapped itself around the porch rails. Daffodils burst from the garden like trumpets announcing hope. The air smelled new, alive, like the world itself had turned a page. And I, Eleanor Grace Miller, was finally ready to write the next chapter. Emily's book idea took root. We called it Not Done Yet. She wove together my stories, my letters, and the voices of the women who had passed through our doors into something far greater than a memoir. It became a declaration. We launched it with a garden party at Grace Haven. Every woman who had ever lived with us was invited, along with their families. Even some of the children who had once been the reason their mothers needed us. People do change. Not all of them, but enough to restore a little faith. Karen didn't come. David didn't write. Luke sent a bitter legal message claiming defamation. We didn't respond. Emily's father and stepmother came instead, flowers in hand. Thank you, her father said quietly, for giving her back to us stronger. That night, after the guests left and the lights were taken down, I sat on the porch once more. Same chair, same mug, same stars overhead. And I let myself remember everything. Not just the pain but the love. George. The babies I held. The home I once had. The silence I survived. The fight I found. The legacy I built with battered hands and an unbroken heart. Maxine joined me, a blanket draped over her lap. Ruth and Dennis waved goodnight from their cottage across the garden. Doy was already inside, writing a poem about reclaiming your bloom. Maxine nudged my arm. You know what you did, right? Did what? I asked. You rewrote the ending. I shook my head, smiling softly. No, I said. I just started telling the truth. She laughed. That gravelly, fearless laugh that had carried us through everything. And in that moment I felt it fully. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not to be chosen. Not to be heard. Not to be seen. I was here. And for every woman who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or forgotten, I left these words, not carved in stone but etched into hearts. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are not done yet. Neither was I. The day the award letter arrived, Emily and I were baking lemon bars. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows, warm and golden, catching on sugar dust in the air. We were laughing hard about something ridiculous Ruth had done the day before. The way her dentures flew across the table during a heated game of Scrabble. The mail came quietly. A simple cream envelope. No flourish. Just our names typed neatly on the front. Emily opened it. Her hands began to shake. She passed it to me without speaking. Congratulations, it read. You have been awarded the Women of Strength Legacy Grant in recognition of your tireless work empowering older women and restoring dignity to those too long forgotten. We honor you with a lifetime endowment to continue and expand your mission. I sank into the nearest chair. Not because of the money, though it would help us build 3 more Grace Havens by year's end, but because of the words. We honor you. No one had ever said that to me before. Emily knelt beside me, her face glowing. You did this, she said. No, I whispered. We did this. Together. We celebrated the following weekend. Not just the grant but the lives rebuilt. Over 100 women gathered in the garden. Some in wheelchairs. Some with walkers. Some with silver braids and bold lipstick. Every face lined with a story worth telling. There were hugs. Songs sung off-key. Speeches through tears. And Ruth crowned me with a wreath she'd made herself. Daisies and ivy, a little crooked, a little wild. Perfect. I wore the wreath like a queen because at last I understood what royalty truly meant. It was never about ruling. It was about rising. That night, after the lanterns were dimmed and the house had fallen asleep, I sat alone in my room. The award certificate rested quietly on the table beside me. Next to it stood George's final letter, the copy I had printed and framed, tucked beside a photograph from our wedding day. We were young in it, bright-eyed, untouched by everything life would later demand of us. For the first time in my life I spoke to him out loud. I did it, George, I whispered. You were right. I was stronger than I ever knew. My voice trembled, but I didn't feel alone. A gentle knock came at the door. Emily peeked inside. Sorry, she said softly. I just wanted to say good night. Come sit, I told her, patting the bed. She curled beside me the way she had when she was little, resting her head on my shoulder. I'm proud of you, I said. I'm proud of you, she whispered back. You turned ashes into light. We stayed that way for a while, no need for words. The silence between us was full of everything sacred. When she finally left, I stood by the window looking out over the garden, over the place where so many women had healed, and where I had healed too. And I understood something then. This wasn't a second chance at life. This was the life I had always deserved. With the moon glowing above and spring heavy in the air, I closed my eyes and smiled, because I had finally come home. Not to a house, but to myself. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe. And feel free to share your own journey in the comments. Your voice matters.